what it means to be an astronomer. And that includes things like diversity and inclusion and policy and all the aspects that go into being a successful scientist. And as a result, I think he produces students who are not only successful scientists, but also sensitive and self-aware people. And so when we asked him, though, I think he was a little bit surprised because he felt perhaps underqualified or inexperienced in giving imposter syndrome workshops, but I guess that is the hallmark of imposter syndrome. So he agreed. Right. So he did agree, so I will turn it over to Jason.
Okay, thanks. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I haven't done this before, and so I want to acknowledge all the people that contributed slides by sharing their slide decks and websites and papers. I learned a lot in the last couple of weeks about imposter syndrome, and some of the most important contributors are up here on the slide. I found the Astronomers Facebook group to be a great resource. People just started dumping slide decks on me, and so that was really, really helpful. I'm sorry, I need my presenters. There is not a way to do this. I apologize, just a second. Should have done this ahead of time. Sorry. Not going to let me in here.
So you're going to have to, I think you have to be plugged into this same display.
What?
So you're going to have to go to properties.
Yeah, it's my usual mirroring button is not present.
Yeah, because, okay, now you're plugged in, it should show up. So go back to properties.
Okay. Perfect.
And hopefully.
Nope, that's all right. We'll just go ahead and wing it. Sorry. Okay, so who needs to, who is this for? Who is this half hour for? First of all, it's certainly for those who suffer from imposter syndrome, especially if you're unaware of what it is, to teach you that, or if you know what it is, but you're unaware that it's a very common phenomenon and it's very fixable. Also, colleagues, teachers, mentors, supervisors, peers, everybody should know this about everybody in our field. So everybody needs to know this is the short version. So what is imposter syndrome? The seminal paper on this is by Clance and Imes, who wrote a paper about what they called imposter phenomenon, same thing, and it was originally identified in high-achieving women, women who were clearly very successful at what they were doing, and yet secretly believed that they weren't, that they did not deserve their kudos. Despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are not really right and have fooled everyone who thinks otherwise. Numerous achievements which one might expect provide ample objective evidence of superior intellectual functioning do not appear to affect the imposter belief. It's fundamentally an irrational thought process. It's not simply a lack of confidence. It's not simply thinking I will never be that brilliant person in my field. It's an unwillingness, an inability to acknowledge tangible evidence of one's own abilities. So we put out a poll. Many of you filled it out. Thank you. We got enough to get some real numbers for this. Asking people a series of questions. First, it was sort of a primer about feelings about where you feel you are intellectually in your among your peers, and then defining imposter syndrome and asking how prevalent you think it is and whether you think you might suffer from it. So for those who haven't read it, I'll put up the questions. So first, rate your agreement with the following 4 statements on a 5-point scale. I'm at least as smart as my peers. I'm afraid others will discover how much knowledge or ability I lack. I succeed because I work harder than others, and I succeed because of my high ability. And then we asked whether you feel you've been affected by imposter syndrome, defined as an internal experience of intellectual phoniness despite external indications of success in the past year, and then in the more distant past. Broke that down into 2 pieces. And then finally, we asked the respondents to guess how many of your peers, and in this case the peers of the people in this room, would say that they're affected by imposter syndrome on this very poll. So I asked you to guess what the results would be. And we broke them down into these 5 bins. So here are the results. And I should make the obvious caveat that an internet poll like this has no scientific validity. And so take it with a grain of salt, but the numbers are consistent when you do this exercise, as I'll show afterwards with another cohort. So what fraction of people in your professional community would you guess have been affected by imposter syndrome? The most common and median answer was 40 to 60%. A little over a quarter guessed it would be less than that, and a little over a third guessed that it would be higher than that. So the question, do you think you've been affected by it? Remember, the scale was yes, severely, yes, mildly, maybe, not sure, and no. So those were the four options. So here are the answers. Do you think you've been affected by imposter syndrome in the past year or so? The total yes was a tick under 70% of respondents. And do you think you've been affected by imposter syndrome before the last year or so? It was nearly 3/4. So over half of the room said yes to these questions. So those are in the high bin of what people would have guessed. Total, only about a third of this room guessed it would be that high. So the lesson here is that it is common to have these feelings that don't belong and to not believe people when they tell you, congratulations, you've earned your degree, or that's a really good paper you wrote, or something like that. Here are similar results just to prove to you that this isn't some anomaly among emerging researchers or something like that. This was a sample at Carnegie DTM, which came up with very similar answers. This pie chart just rotated 90 degrees. It's basically what we had on the previous slide. And then, do you think you've been affected? Over 3/4 answered yes to the recent and more distant ones. And otherwise, the numbers are very similar. So this is consistent, and it's nothing particular about this group. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about when we talk about imposter syndrome? And what are the hallmarks? So again, it's this mismatch between external evidence of accomplishment and self-image. And it's a little ironic, this affects lots of fields, but it's a little ironic that it affects scientists, because we're being trained in how to objectively look at the evidence and put aside our preconceived notions and go where the data lead us. But here's a part of our careers where it can be very hard to do that. It's characterized by this feeling of fraudulence or phoniness, of having achieved success not through genuine ability, but through somehow having deceived others into believing that we know things that we don't, or that we have competences that we don't. It's often accompanied by a fear of being discovered, that one day you'll say something that reveals your ignorance about something, and the whole house of cards will come crashing down. They go, oh, you didn't actually know any astronomy after all. And this last bullet's important. It's not always mentioned in this list, but it comes with a real distorted, unrealistic, and totally unsustainable definition of competence. It comes from a sort of idealization of what successful astronomers are like, and what they do, and what they know, an overestimation of what success looks like. An idea that people who are successful are sort of, they're congenital geniuses, they were child prodigies, they've had success and honors all their careers, and they just have all of these attributes that we don't. People, very successful child prodigies, like Jodie Foster or someone like that, who all her career has just been the best at everything she's done. She's won Oscars, skipped all these grades in school. She's the sort of person we imagine all successful, maybe actors would be like. Here's an actual quote from Jodie Foster after receiving, I guess, her second Oscar. I thought it was a fluke. It was the same way when I walked on the campus at Yale. I thought everybody would find out and they'd take the Oscar back. They'd come to my house knocking on the door, excuse me, we meant to give that to someone else. That was going to Meryl Streep. So here's Meryl Streep taking her Oscar back. Greatest actor of her generation, 3 Oscars, more nominations than everybody. Perfect people like this obviously don't have things like imposter syndrome, except they do. Why would anyone want to see me again in a movie, and I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? So here's proof that this is completely irrational, right? I mean, if your name is synonymous with being the best actor one could possibly be, on a first-name basis, then these sorts of thoughts cannot have any rational basis. And so this is what we mean when we talk about imposter syndrome. It doesn't only apply to the Meryls of the science world, it applies to everybody who just denies external evidence of their competence. So maybe you're thinking, okay, actors, that's not an intellectual exercise, they don't have it's all squishy, they don't have objective metrics of greatness like Nobel Prizes, what do they know about the human condition after all? We wouldn't expect someone who has those sorts of qualifications, a Nobel laureate, to have those sorts of thoughts. I know, not Maya, please not Maya, yes, Maya Angelou. I have written 11 books and won a Nobel, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. So here's this total sense of phoniness that someone's going to figure out that she actually does not know how to plumb the depths of the human psyche in a beautiful language. Okay, so maybe you think humanities are kind of squishy, maybe they're not actually objective, maybe this really shouldn't be the right example, so let me pick on a good friend of mine. John Johnson, you might have heard of him. We're going to go back to 2009. At this point, he was a PhD from Berkeley. He had won a Sagan Fellowship, and he had just been appointed as an assistant professor at Caltech. So for many of us thinking about the alternative career track of becoming a tenure-line professor, it's hard to imagine a better arc than that. That's like the dream arc. You get the Price Fellowship out of grad school, and then you get hired at a place like Caltech. You could not have stronger evidence of your own competence than that CV. Why would anyone want to see me again? I'm sorry, I get him and Meryl confused all the time. Sorry. Okay, here we go. After 6 months, I joined the faculty at Caltech. After I joined, I woke up in a cold sweat to the terrifying realization that I didn't have a contingency plan for my family when I would inevitably be either let go or denied tenure. It was only a matter of time before my colleagues discovered how little I know about astronomy. They were going to discover that they made a mistake in hiring me as a professor. Now, I probably don't need to tell those people in this room, this was not true. He would go on to be a Sloan Fellow, to win the AAS Pierce Prize, and get pushed by Harvard at the rank of full professor at age 36, but who's counting? So John has talked about imposter syndrome, and he recounts a story of after one of these talks he did. A student came up to him and said, well, I can totally see how other people can suffer from imposter syndrome, but what about when you know you're the exception? That is really which just goes straight to the heart of what this is, that this isn't a rational thing that you can necessarily reason out, okay? This is not a rational reaction to external stimuli. So where does this come from? And this is part of where all of us can do something. Part of it comes from unreasonable expectations and norms for what we consider successful research to be, and helps set up an impossible standard that no one can meet, and therefore makes people think that they can't possibly really belong. So here are some of the misconceptions that contribute to imposter syndrome that are sort of the norm in our profession. So one is that success or quality of research is primarily due to extreme amounts of a narrow technical competence in one dimension. That there's this good astronomer axis, and there's some people way, way out, and they're the ones that make it. John Johnson likes to call this the cult of smart, that this raw Einstein-like brain power is the thing, and if you don't think you match that profile, then it must be that other people think you do if you're succeeding. The second one is that competence, or whatever underlies it, is some sort of fixed trait that some people have and others do not. The Jodie Foster model of success, that you just always have it, you were born with it. And which means you can never catch up, right? Because it's this fixed trait that you have, and there's nothing you can do to become like those other people that are set at an impossible standard. And the last one goes back to this unrealistic definition of competence, that the most successful, competent people, the John Johnsons, that they are perfectionists who don't make mistakes, and that they don't take on a problem until they're ready for it. They don't write a paper until they are an expert in every aspect of the field on which they are writing that paper, and that is not true. So let's talk about the truth about these 3 bullet points. In fact, there are many dimensions of research intelligence. There's an anecdote about Ed Turner and Scott Tremaine who decided to write down what they felt the space of quality was in doing astronomical research. What were the skills that made one successful? Pointing out that you just need to be good at some of those, or a lot of them, and it's this 7-dimensional vector that you're trying to get to be very long to say that you're doing good work. So this is rebutting the idea that competence is one-dimensional. So the 7 dimensions that they mapped out are taste, this ability to identify important, answerable questions and work on those. Intelligence may be the one dimension most of us think of, the adeptness at basic and complex problem solving. That is one of their bullets. Grit, an ability to persevere, to do the long slog, to actually finish tasks, to finish that paper, to finish the long expansion that nobody bothered to expand out before. Knowledge, just possession of the relevant facts. This is one that clearly can't be innate. This is one that we can all get better at all the time. The more things you know, the more facts and skills that you have at your disposal, the more effective you will be. Curiosity, just alertness to anomalies. That thing that everyone else overlooked, that you just got curious and played with and realized turned out to be very important. Incurious scientists might work on very boring problems. And they said luck, and by luck they mean 2 things. Certainly, there's a lot of luck in having a successful career, happening to have the right office mate, the lottery that is a lot of grant writing, but there's also manufactured luck. Warren Buffett calls it the residue of design. It's that manufactured by just this ability to expose yourself to potential constructive paths. And then communication. Science is a social endeavor. If you don't talk to people, and you don't get feedback, and you don't get input, and you don't draw on other people's expertise, then you won't be as successful. And some people are incredibly good at this, and can just make colleagues through one sentence at a meeting, and it turns into a paper, and are able to do that. So this list is important for a couple of reasons. One is, if in your mental model of success you've only picked intelligence or one of these other ones, then you need to make sure you're developing these other dimensions. And if you really like this, I recommend John Johnson's blog post. He has his own 7-dimensional space that he advocates for. But it also means that for those of us who are mentoring and hiring, we need to make sure we're on the lookout for all of these qualities, and that we're not just hiring people that look like we imagine we are, and that we're helping our students develop along all of these axes as well. Especially when it's an axis we don't think we're good at. We need to make sure we nonetheless nurture that in our students where that is their strong suit. So these lists, I mean, you look at these 7, and maybe, okay, intuition and luck, maybe those things aren't developable. I think you can develop them. Many of the other ones clearly are, like knowledge. These are skills you develop. These are habits you learn. And so competence in academia, it follows from this set of skills that improve with practice, and you get better at it. That's what grad school and your whole career is all about, constantly improving those axes. And next, the most successful people make mistakes all the time. John Wooden famously said, if you aren't making mistakes, you're not doing anything. You should be pushing the boundary and messing up and working on problems that are maybe a little bit out of your reach. The most successful people very often, in fact maybe always, go to work on problems that are just beyond what they know how to do. And they're willing to take a chance and make a mistake and see if it works. And they learn as they go. And that's where a lot of the big breakthroughs came, was people trying to do something and they weren't sure if it could happen. So that means they will make mistakes, and they're okay with that. And so we need to learn to embrace imperfection and know that it's all right to make an occasional mistake, and hope you do, in fact. So what can one do about imposter syndrome? Well, it's not an innate, immutable personality trait. It's more like a habit that can be, a habit of the mind that can be kicked. One can get over this. One is find supportive friends, family, and discuss it. Get it, normalize it, Sarah Ballard said. And get it out there, and don't keep it to yourself. Find supportive mentors and learn the habits of successful people. I'll have a reference at the end that makes the strong case that emulating the habits of your role models will help make you more like them. And so you should learn from your mentors what it is that they do that makes them good at what they do, and do that. Keep in review tangible evidence of success. This is really valuable. This could be published papers, invitations, citations, acceptance letters, and confront your feeling of phoniness with concrete evidence to the contrary, regularly. Some people like to keep what they call a happy file or a nice file. When you get some sort of kudo or thanks or praise, don't just archive it, file it away in a folder called happy or nice or something. And when you are feeling down, or even when you're just looking for a quick high, open it up and read those and believe them. Look at who it is saying those things. And finally, embrace imperfection. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. So go for it. And don't imagine that your role models don't make mistakes. It also helps to directly confront the irrationality and double standards that are behind it. Now, imposter syndrome is by definition irrational, and so you can't exactly reason your way out of it, so I would put most of the emphasis on the previous slide. But when discussing it, apply all of your rationality towards some of these points. Imposter syndrome has a lot of, in it you have a lot of respect for your peers and your superiors' judgment, right? You think they're great and you're not. Except when it comes to their opinion of you, at which point you completely discount all of their expertise and believe yourself instead. There's this conviction that everyone else's success is obviously due to competence, but somehow your own is due to luck or deception, like, you're the only one. It's also an amazing vote of confidence in yourself if you think about it. That you have a disregard for your own trained abilities, except for your own totally untrained ability to trick people in their own fields. Because you're basically saying, I am so good at this that these world experts in this topic, I've totally fooled them about that topic. And so it's actually some twisted way, a vote of confidence in your own abilities to have this imposter syndrome. So I also, talking about this, I think it's really important to address the issue of mental health. Imposter syndrome is not a recognized medical disorder. It is not a mental illness. It's a very real and very common phenomenon. However, imposter syndrome can be greatly exacerbated and an enormous symptom of other mental health issues, like depression and anxiety disorders. If you broke your wrist, everyone would think it was ridiculous if you refused to go to a doctor and said, no, it's not going to slow me down. I'm going to keep doing my research. I'm not weak. I can push through this. But many mental health issues are just as hampering and just as treatable as a broken wrist. And it is just as ridiculous to try and push through them, because by definition, you can't reason your way out of them. So getting back to John Johnson, who has an anecdote on his blog, he, after writing a lot and making this point and discussing these 3 bullets a lot in talks and on his blog and being a big proponent of this approach, decided to take his own advice And he went to get treatment for anxiety and depression. And he's got some great blog posts discussing this. Shortly after breakthrough in his treatment, I was suddenly able to hear compliments and not assume I had fooled the person. I was finally able to hear praise. I could give a colloquium and not obsess about the slide transition I missed, and was actually able to hear it when people said that was a great talk. I can't tell you how good it feels to hear someone say that and not have to brush it off. It wasn't humility that caused me to do that before. I truly couldn't hear it. And so in his case, his imposter syndrome, which was almost crippling, was being greatly exacerbated by other problems. And as I pointed out, he's done pretty well for himself since then. And so that's one reason that he's been so open about this, encouraging others to do the same that are in his position. Let me close with a list of some resources that I've had recommended to me and that I know about. Multiple people recommended the top one, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. I should point out that although this was first identified in highly successful women, it is pervasive across all demographics, some more than others, but no demographic is immune to this. I think that's testified by the 3/4 of the people who said answered yes to the survey consistently in all cohorts. This book is pitched towards women, but its advice is general. The second book, Mindset, is about fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets. It's written by Carol Dweck, who's a clinician that has developed this field of studying fixed and growth mindsets. This particular book is written as sort of a pop psychology self-help book, but it is based on real research by the person who did that research. I suspect there was a ghostwriter to help get the self-help tone correct. But it's real research. And the last one, Advice for New Faculty Members, has a lot of, this is the reference I was talking about. Robert Boyce has studied what makes faculty successful. What are their successful habits? And he's taken on faculty who fit some profile, perhaps not succeeding in getting tenure, and trained them to follow those habits. And he has done scientific research on what it takes to be a successful professor. This is great for new faculty members because it tends to focus on the day-to-day life of being a faculty member. So there's stuff in here about teaching and classroom incivilities. So it's not necessarily all of it is completely applicable to everyone in this room, but especially for postdocs and late-time grad students, the stuff on time management and the habits of, they're all good habits to develop. So I recommend that book as well. Thanks.
Question sort of on this self-polling. How is this not like the classic catch-22?
On the what?
On sort of the initial self-polling that you talked about, who identifies this in themselves, isn't it sort of the classic catch-22 of the people that it affects are going to say that they're not affected by it?
The people affected by imposter syndrome are going to say they're not affected by it?
Yeah.
If that's true, then my numbers are low, right? So I think the point stands.
Is there a correlation where in the career it starts to happen? For example, I could imagine as long as you're in school and still get like a grade every week and get like a measurable number to the, you know, the tenth of a point every week, it might be less than when you suddenly jump to that pool where the only review is a regulator once in a while.
So maybe imposter syndrome might even get worse as you climb the ladder.
I mean, if you get like a grade every week, which usually...
You have a lot of objective feedback,
Yeah.
but in the higher ranks you get less objective feedback.
I mean, that's what I see. The farther you get in your career, the less feedback you actually get. Might that be...
That could be. I mean, the feedback is different, but there's still, you know, grant feedback and things. I don't know. It might get worse in the sense that, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it gets worse with career. Great.
So, like, if it becomes overwhelming and it stops you from being able to do anything,
Yep.
you might consider imposter syndrome to be bad, but wouldn't a little imposter syndrome be
Sure.
a good thing? Because
So-
all these people are incredibly successful. because they're afraid of looking like a fool. So
So in terms of its effect on your career, if that's what you mean by good or bad, then yeah, it can both be highly motivating because you really don't want to be found out. Someone likes to say it just takes up CPU cycles because you're worrying about it, and that can't help. So it's certainly a negative. It may also have positive components, and who knows, maybe that's why Maya Angelou wrote 11 books, because she was just so worried that her last one wasn't good enough. I don't know. But the axis I'm thinking about is your happiness as a person, and your, I mean, this is not something people should have on their shoulders if they don't have to have it on their shoulders.
What are the recommendations for dealing with negative reinforcement for imposter syndrome? Say you get a
negative
review on a paper, or you fail a qualifier or something like that, and have to do it.
I don't know how to answer how to deal with negative feedback in the context of imposter syndrome in particular. I'm not even sure I really know how to deal with any negative feedback. I know I take it really hard. I have to keep that email unread for a while. I don't know, do people have a good answer, a better answer to that question than I do?
Isn't that
Yes.
the perfect time you pull out the happy file?
The happy file. The happy file. That's when you pull out the happy file. Very good. Yeah.
I would also say mentors are really helpful because like most of the people above you have failed at some point on something probably similar to what you failed on, like especially the qualifier or something.
Yeah.
So asking someone else where their mistakes were.
So that'd be a good time to go and hit that talk to friends, family, mentor about it. Don't just carry it yourself and keep it a secret. Eric.
And maybe get some accurate information. So if 1 in 17 people won the fellowship, it's not so bad that you did it.
That's right. Yeah, and keep in mind, anything with a 1 in 17 rate is a crapshoot. I mean, you might have had the best one, but it just wasn't the best one to one of the reviewers. So there you go. Ming.
It seems like there's no clear boundary between a little bit of the syndrome
Right.
and being modest.
I disagree. Imposter syndrome is an irrational response to positive feedback. Modesty can be a purely outward thing, and it can be sort of a just not caring so much about where your status is. But imposter syndrome, I think, is not modesty. It's almost obsession with your status. Whereas modesty is more detachment, I would say. That's how I would define those terms.
I just want to share an idea that I found helpful in combating imposter syndrome myself. I was trying to understand where it comes from, like where is this irrational thought process, what is the genesis of it? And I read about a well-known cognitive bias called what you see is all there is. And I think that contributes to a lot of imposter thoughts, because what you see in your colleagues is all of the ideas that were successful. When someone's talking about something, it's because they're an expert in it. And so it's helpful to keep that in mind, because even though you know internally you don't know all those things, when you're talking to someone about something you're an expert in, they are probably thinking exactly the same thing.
That's really, yeah, that's very insightful. I like that. That when you hear people talking about things, they're generally talking about things they know a whole lot about. And so you only ever hear them talking about things that they are total experts in. At least there's a bias in that direction. So you get, that could be where this image of successful people as being perfect comes from. I like that. Comments?
So I would also add a comment somewhat related, I guess, to what Greg asked, and also a comment about negative reinforcement. In that, so more than just like receiving negative feedback, negative reinforcement is a concept that's often used as getting like good results out of bad habits, right? That sort of reinforces those bad habits. And I would just, I guess, add to sort of be aware a little bit of that, say along the lines of what Greg asked, if some of these like bad behaviors do get good results, so I'm getting some positive feedback at least, then it can encourage you to continue those bad habits because you think you're getting good results out of that. But that's the negatively reinforcing that, when maybe changing, you still get good results and also say be happy.
Yeah. Be happy. You're a better researcher when you're happy. I think we have time for one.
I was just going to say, in comment to that, the difference is that a lot of times, I would imagine you kind of know if you're taking sloppy shortcuts and bad habits. I mean, or you can read the feedback and say, oh, yeah, maybe I should have done it this way, versus imposter syndrome, where you're like, no, I put everything into it. I did it the way that, you know, I'm supposed to be doing it as best I know. I'm still, it's a difference, but it's a minor difference. I mean, it's a big difference, but it's subtle.
I agree. And getting back to the question about how to deal with negative feedback. Part of in the mindset, part of the framework is that people with growth mindsets take negative feedback constructively as a map for improvement, and they seek negative feedback. And if the feedback they're getting is all positive, then they're like, I can't do anything with this. I can't grow. Whereas with a fixed mindset, negative feedback is an indictment of their person. It has nothing to do with their work. It's something they can change. It's a negative thing about them that they can't change. It's just proof that they're no good. And so that's part of this mindset. That's a good answer on how to deal with negative feedback. Okay, I think we're out of time. Do you want to?
Yeah. So we have on the agenda to continue this discussion around lunch. So each table will have a duly appointed discussion leader, so we can continue the conversation. Jason will be at one of the tables, so you can mob him and try to get at that table. So yeah, lunch is going to be the same as it was yesterday. So if you prepaid and you have your lunch ticket, you can just put it in your spot. Oh, hold on, sit down. I know you're hungry. So it'll be just like the buffet. Everything will be the same. We should be able to have it. Also, because it's starting to get towards the afternoon, some people may have to start their travel early. So again, just a reminder, if you haven't filled out your survey yet, that was in your packet, please take the time before you leave the conference to do that. The box to drop it off is on the